Now I've been looking back at my channel these past few days. Gintama, JoJo, Evangelion. Hang on a sec, I like all of those shows. And we can't be having that, all this happy-go-lucky nonsense. What is this, fairy tale? To appreciate the good, we need to look the other way occasionally, taking a dive down into the bad. And it should come as no surprise that while we do have some absolute masterpieces in the anime industry, there are just as many shows on the opposing side of the spectrum. For example, recently I was feeling a bit too happy in life, so I took it upon myself to watch all 12 episodes of X-Arm, one of the most infamous anime of this year, and in the future, potentially of all time. So let's begin with a bit of context, why don't we? I'm not someone who can jump into any form of media without looking at a good number of reviews beforehand. If I'm sacrificing time to watch an anime, it better be time well spent. And I want to completely ensure that, so my general rule of thumb is to go onto my anime list and try and find a show ideally over 8 stars, 7 stars minimum. Anything below 7 stars is generally not the best. And that's usually pretty accurate. Shows that constantly get a lot of hate sit anywhere from 5 to 6 stars, fair enough, but my god, X-Arm wishes it was 6 stars, 2.96 out of 10, without question the lowest rated anime I've ever seen. So obviously I had to check it out for myself. Let's get into it. X-Arm is a 12 episode dystopian sci-fi anime based on the manga of the same name, illustrated by Shinya Komi. And as will become clear, when it comes to the art, they did this poor man dirty. This is the fantastic art from the manga. Take it into consideration as we move forward. And I know it's a bit weird to start a review with the art and animation. Normally the plot would come first and I'll leave the art and animation until last, but I think X-Arm is a valid exception. Shinya Komi is also the same guy behind the mid-episode transition cards, which are all high-quality pieces of art. However, the only tiny, miniature, microscopic problem is that the rest of the anime looks like this. Yep, anime's best friend, CGI. Now, I don't mind CGI all that much if it allows for an anime to be produced quicker and more efficiently, while also putting less of a strain on the already overworked and severely underpaid employees, then so be it, especially considering it can look good if done well. Dorohedoro and Beastars are prime examples of anime almost completely animated in CG, which both look great. Maybe not with the spectacle of, say, Attack on Titan, but definitely a step in the right direction. And also, I want to make it absolutely clear that the art and animation is certainly not the only reason I dislike this anime, as we'll get onto later. But there is a certain point of no return when it comes to CG anime, and X-Arm is definitely past that point. It looks terrible, there is no nice way of putting it. All of it from the janky PS2 character models to the stiff animation and laughable choreography put this anime in a pretty dire state. This anime does no favours to my eyes, and I don't know what I can say that isn't already obvious. I mean, just look at it. It's almost as if the studio has never worked in the anime industry or something. Okay, never mind. As it turns out, X-Arm was animated by Visual Flight, a brand new studio who have indeed never worked in the anime industry before. Why am I not surprised? Leaving X-Arm as their only work. Certainly not the proudest of resumes. The bad CG is most strongly highlighted during the fight scenes, some of the most unnatural pieces of animation I've ever seen. Stiff, clunky, and not at all fluid in what is supposed to be a fast-paced action scene. The fights look like they're out of a turn-based RPG. You hit me, I hit you. You hit me, I hit you. There's no fluidity in the movements at all. It just makes the fight feel slow and drag on for way longer than it needs to be. And moving away from the CGI itself, even the 2D animation looks bad, especially when combined with the CG in the same shot for some reason. If they were going to go for majority CGI, they may as well have gone all the way. Anyone remember how in Ocarina of Time they had 3D models laid upon a 2D plane to give the illusion of space? That was pretty incredible for a video game in 1998, but for an anime in 2021, not so much. There are just so many uncanny factors at play here. The facial expressions barely ever change according to the character's emotion, the speech is barely synced with the character's lips, and their eyes are always in a fixed position, staring off into space. Nothing looks right at all, which is a shame, because if this anime had good animation, it would still be pretty mediocre, but a lot better than this. Oh, and a little side note I found afterwards, the X-Arm wiki page for one of the main characters literally says, quote, She also can't stop smiling for some reason, perhaps due to animation limitations as opposed to a personality trait. What? Whereas with some anime, the stars align perfectly. In X-Arm, the stars ran away as far as they could, with the animation just being one of them. As we move on to factor number 2, the plot. Let's start with a quick synopsis. This anime follows our teenage protagonist Akira Natsume in the year 2014, in which he is hit by a truck, putting him into a coma for the next 16 years. He subsequently reawakens in the year 2030 to find out that nothing but his brain is still alive and being stored in what is known as an X-Arm. These so-called X-Arms are devices and weapons that transcend modern technology in the year 2030, allowing their users to wield powerful abilities that defy science as they know it. No one knows where these X-Arms came from or who made them. It's at this point we meet the other two of our main trio. Minami, a teenage girl, and Alma, an android who both work for the Counter X-Arm Squad, who aim to stop all disasters caused by these X-Arms as a result of the 2020 Tokyo terror attacks. You keeping up so far? This was a large-scale attack in the heart of Tokyo caused by X-Arms at the hands of a mysterious figure known as Beta, who often shows up within Akira's mind. So that's about it. That was a lot of concepts being thrown around, so if you didn't quite catch that all, don't worry about it. We're talking about X-Arm, you're not gonna watch it anyway unless you're a complete masochist, or even worse, a YouTuber. My best statement about X-Arm is what could have been. There's a lot of genuinely good and interesting ideas at play that are either handled poorly or simply never expanded upon. An example of the latter would be the aforementioned X-Arms. The idea that these devices exist that transcend modern science, such as producing a mini black hole or phasing through walls, while also adding an element of mystery. No one knows where they came from or who created them, ultimately making these X-Arms to be a pretty interesting concept. But my god, despite being the namesake of the show, they are never elaborated upon. And because of that, they become stale and uninteresting as a result. Speaking of which, let's get on to the characters, why don't we? Most of the main cast are not great, not terrible, just fine in my opinion. Our protagonist Akira is generic shonen teenage protagonist number 2 million. He is especially bland in my opinion, and the exact same could be said with our deuteragonist Minami. Neither of them do anything to make themselves unique or at least slightly interesting in the grand scheme of things. Until, for Akira at least, the ending, which I'm not gonna lie, was actually pretty climactic. Nonsensical, but climactic nonetheless, so credit where credit's due. Then we have Alma, easily the most interesting character in the show, mainly due to her being an android, but also as the only character to really show any form of character development, which is ironic considering she's the only non-human. And then the rest of the squad consists of Kondo, whose personality traits you can probably guess by his appearance, and this guy who's so uninteresting and irrelevant to the story, I can't remember his name. We also have this mad scientist Hanji knockoff, as well as their squad commander Chikage, who exists for the sole purpose of... what is it again? Oh yeah, that's right, fan service. All of the main cast have pretty mediocre characterization, and there's not a whole lot to say about them, to be honest. But to give a couple positive points, the character designs themselves aren't that bad. They all look pretty unique and distinguished, and there's a lot of varied colour without them becoming too over-designed. Sure, a lot of the designs are there to facilitate fan service, especially in the manga, but ultimately, I think they're pretty decent. The same could be said about the voice acting. This is Japanese standards after all. I can't speak for the English dub, if it even has one, but the Japanese voice acting is as good as you'd expect, with many characters sharing voice actors with other characters from pretty popular and well-renowned shows. But with that being said, I think you really would need to dive deep to find an anime with genuinely bad Japanese voice acting. But we haven't even talked about the villains yet, because they are beyond one-dimensional. The main villain, Beta, literally just evil because he is. There are no layers whatsoever to be explored, he exists just to fill the role of this anime's antagonist, instead of an actual developed character. And this side villain here has a little more development, but is equally bad if not worse. He's pretty much the one responsible for killing Minami's entire family until we get the plot twist that his android is Minami's former brother. But he has the most abrupt, rushed, stupidest character development I have ever seen. He goes from meeting her to sacrificing his life to save her within the same day. What is this, a Darman video? How does he change his ways immediately after meeting her? So, are there any great characters I genuinely like in X-Arm? No, not really, and especially not any of the villains. All of them are incredibly generic and entirely consist of cliché tropes. Not one of them stands out at all. I also want to go back to this anime's plot twists, which, funnily enough, I have to say are actually pretty good in my opinion. Apart from the fact I'm lying, they are terrible. Either incredibly predictable or incredibly nonsensical. For example, this guy called Auctioneer shows up around episode 6. He looks like Akira's brother, he's concealing his identity, Akira's brother hasn't shown up yet in the present. It was pretty obvious that this was Akira's brother straight away. And fast forward a couple episodes. Whoa, no way, it's Akira's brother. Wow, who could have guessed that? Surely not anyone with more than one brain cell could have figured out this mystery. So yeah, the plot twists aren't at all great, and with that, I think I should finally sum up my thoughts and come to a bit of a conclusion. So, X-Arm, what could have been? Some decent ideas, but a poor execution. And ultimately, I'd probably give it a 4.5 out of 10 based on the plot, characters and concepts alone. But the absolutely god-awful animation in the anime really does add insult to injury, dropping it down to a 2 out of 10 in my opinion, not just because it looks ugly, but because it fails to effectively convey what was intended. For example, this anime is incredibly action heavy, and the action scenes had the potential of being the highlights of this anime, you know, a bit like God of High School in that regard. But when they look like this, how are you supposed to take it seriously or be properly invested? I don't know. I originally started this anime from a so bad but it's good perspective, thinking I'll get a good laugh out of it. But as the episodes went by, that novelty started to fade away. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but the latter half was incredibly boring. I mean, look at some of these headlines. It's pretty extraordinary that animation can be this bad. Ultimately, the dystopian genre is one I seem to like quite a lot. Steins Gate, Psycho Pass, and more recently, Vivi and 86 are prime examples of dystopian sci-fi done well, because unlike X-Arm, the world building in those shows is interesting. So, X-Arm, what could have been? I'll leave that up to you to think about, and with that being said, I'll be back in the next video. See ya!